Good morning, boys and girls. I'm Eleanor Hawkins, and welcome to Telestory Time. The Library, a Magic Castle. Come to the Magic Castle when you are growing tall. Rows upon rows of word windows line every single wall. They reach up high as the sky, and you want to open them all. For every time you open one, a new adventure has begun. The Library, a Magic Castle. And now, boys and girls, I'm going to read you a real, true-to-life, once-upon-a-time story in just a moment. Today is June the 24th, a very special day in my life. Carol and I are celebrating our 66th wedding anniversary today. Now I'm going to read you a true, once-upon-a-time story. Once upon a time, in 1949, Eleanor Dixon of Fairmont, West Virginia, met Carol Hawkins of Cove City, North Carolina, at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. 2 years later, in 1951, they were married at the First Baptist Church in Fairmont, West Virginia, on June the 24th, 66 years ago today. Following the wedding ceremony, a reception was held in the church library. They have been very blessed by the good Lord for these 66 years, and they are living happily ever after. Now, I want to wish my dedicated and loving husband, Carol, happy 66th wedding anniversary by reading this poem. Carol, you're still the one. You're still the one I want to love forever. You still are the one that I want to share my dreams with, build castles in the air with, and the one whose hand I want to hold forever. Yes, Carol, a happy anniversary with all my love. Boys and girls, stay tuned, and we'll be back in just a moment to read our big Do You Know book. Stay tuned. And now, boys and girls, I'm going to read from my big Do You Know book. Do you know all about the month of June? Do you know the gems for June are the pearl, the alexandrite, and the moonstone? Do you know the flower for June is the rose? Do you know that spring ends and summer begins around the 20th, the 21st, or the 22nd of June? Do you know that Flag Day is observed in the United States on June the 14th? It commemorates the day in 1777 when the Continental Congress adopted the Stars and Stripes as our flag. And it only had 13 stars and 13 stripes then. Do you know that President Harry S. Truman officially recognized June the 14th by signing the official Flag Day bill? Boys and girls, let me remind you, be sure and visit your public library sometime during this next week. Any of the libraries in the Craven, Pamlico, Carteret Regional Library System. Be sure and sign up for the summer reading program that is starting in all of our libraries. Be sure and check the date and register so that you can have a good time reading all summer. You know, reading can be fun. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back in another story in just a moment. Stay tuned. And now, boys and girls, I'm going to read you my very favorite Once Upon a Time story. Yes, it is Cinderella. Once there was a girl who was as good as she was beautiful. She lived with her stepmother and her two stepsisters. Oh, they were cruel to her because she was more beautiful than they. They made her scrub and clean all day long and gave her only rags to wear. At night, she slept in the chimney corner. Because she was always covered with ashes, they called her Cinder Wench, or Cinderella. One day, the king's son announced that he was going to give a ball. Cinderella's two stepsisters were invited. They began to choose silks and laces for their ball gowns, and jewels and feathers for their hair. They talked of nothing else but how fine they would look at the palace ball. "Oh, you can fix our hair for us," they said to Cinderella. She fixed their hair in different ways and did her best to make them look beautiful. But no matter how hard she tried, Cinderella still looked more beautiful than they, even in her rags. They made the stepsisters angry. "Why don't you go to the ball too, Cinderella?" they asked. The poor girl looked down at her rags and said, "Oh, how I wish I could go." Then they laughed at her and said, "Imagine a cinder wrench at the prince's ball." With tears in her eyes, Cinderella watched her stepsisters get into their coach and depart for the ball. "Just the same, I do wish I could go," she whispered to herself. Now at that very moment, she heard a voice behind her saying, "And so you shall, my child." Cinderella turned around, and there stood a lovely lady with a crown on her head. "I am your fairy godmother," she said, "and I shall prepare you for the prince's ball. First, run into the garden and get me the biggest pumpkin you can find." Cinderella ran into the garden and brought back the pumpkin. The fairy waved her wand over the pumpkin, and it changed instantly into a splendid red coach with gold trimmings. "Now we need 6 horses," said the fairy godmother. "Run and fetch the mousetrap." Cinderella brought the mousetrap. There were 6 lively little mice in the trap. The fairy waved her wand, and the mice became 6 prancing white horses with tassels on their heads. "Now we need a coachman," said the fairy. "Bring the rat trap." Cinderella brought the rat trap with one big rat sitting in it. The fairy waved her wand, and the rat became a coachman with a coachman's hat and a plume on his head. He jumped up on the coach and took the reins in his hand. "Oh, we need a footman too," said the fairy. 6 will do. Run and fetch 6 green lizards." Cinderella brought back the lizards. The fairy waved her wand, and immediately there were 6 footmen dressed in purple livery, trimmed with gold. "There," said the fairy. "Are you happy now?" "Oh, but my clothes," said Cinderella, looking down at her rags. The fairy godmother laughed gently and touched Cinderella with her wand. Cinderella's rags fell off, and she was dressed in a magnificent ball gown of golden silk. There were diamonds in her hair, and on her feet twinkled 2 lovely little glass slippers. "And now off to the ball," said the fairy. "But you must remember that the magic ends at midnight. You must be home at 12 o'clock, or you will find yourself again in rags." Cinderella promised to be back at midnight, and she rode off to the ball. Now, when Cinderella arrived at the ball, everyone whispered, "Oh, what a beautiful princess! I wonder who she is." Even the stepsisters did not recognize Cinderella, but they were envious. "Why, the prince dances with no one but her," they said to each other. Indeed, Cinderella and the prince were the handsomest couple on the dance floor, and the prince never left Cinderella's side. When supper was served, he picked out the choicest fruits and cakes for her. He took Cinderella by the hand and led her to the king and queen and told them that he loved her. Oh, Cinderella was so happy that she quite forgot about the time. Suddenly she heard the clock strike the first note of 12 midnight. Quickly she curtsied to the prince and then fled from the room and out of the castle. She hurried down the marble steps to her coach. And just as she was about to step into the coach, the last note of 12 sounded. The coach vanished before her eyes, and there on the ground lay a pumpkin. The rat and mice scurried off, and the lizards crawled away in the dust. Cinderella stood there dressed in her rags again. Now the lovely little glass slippers were all that remained, but Cinderella had lost one of the slippers on the marble steps when she hurried down. She limped home on the other slipper and reached the chimney corner before her stepsister returned. The next morning, everyone was awakened by the sound of a bugle. A messenger from the palace called out the news that the prince had found the glass slipper. He was going to take it to every house in the kingdom until he could find its owner. When he found the girl, she would become his bride. All the young ladies in the kingdom were excited. They all hurried to put on their best dresses for the prince's visit. But Cinderella had nothing to wear but her rags. The prince went to every house looking for the beautiful girl, and at last he came to Cinderella's house. Oh, Cinderella's stepsister pushed her aside in their hurry to try on the slipper. "Oh, I think it will fit me," said the older girl, but she could not even squeeze her toes into the tiny slipper. The younger stepsister had no better luck when she tried the slipper on. "Oh, please let me try," said Cinderella in a shy little voice. "You," cried the stepsisters, "go back to your cinders and ashes where you belong." But the prince looked for a long time at Cinderella's lovely face. He knew he had seen that face before. "Let her try," said the prince. Cinderella slipped her foot into the glass slipper easily, and then, to everyone's amazement, she drew the other slipper out of her pocket and put it on her other foot. At that very moment, the fairy godmother appeared, and with her wand she touched Cinderella. And there she stood, dressed again in the splendid ball gown. The prince gazed at her with joy, and then knelt down at her feet and said, "This is my own true bride." Oh, a great wedding feast was held. Cinderella was so happy that she forgave her stepsisters. She took them to live with her at the palace, where they married 2 lords. And you know, boys and girls, Cinderella and the prince lived happily ever after. And that is the story that we all love, Cinderella. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back with another story in just a moment. And now, boys and girls, I'm going to read you the magic key. Tommy and Mary Lou lived with their mother and father in a little house at the edge of a beautiful forest. Little Mary Lou was sure that fairies and elves lived in the forest. But matter of fact, Tommy said, "That's nonsense. Seeing is believing, and I've never seen a fairy or an elf." One day, Tommy said, "I'm tired of playing in the garden. Let's go into the woods." "And let's look for the fairies," suggested Mary Lou. "I've told you 1,000 times, Mary Lou, that is nonsense. But let's go." Tommy took Mary Lou by the hand, and off they went along the winding path that led into the forest. Mary Lou and Tommy walked and walked until they came to a big rock at the foot of an old oak tree. Mary Lou saw a funny little hole in the rock. "Well, look," she called to Tommy. "It's just like a keyhole." "How strange," said Tommy. "I think I have a key that fits in there. I found it in the garden this morning." Then Tommy fished into his pocket and pulled out a rusty old key. "This must be the key to fairyland," said Mary Lou. Tommy fitted the key into the hole of the rock, and before he could say nonsense, the strangest thing happened. The rusty old key began to glow like gold. The ferns and the toadstools near the rock seemed to grow and grow and grow. The toadstools became so tall that Tommy and Mary Lou could stand under them, which is exactly what they did. "Are we getting smaller, or are the toadstools growing taller?" asked Tommy in a matter-of-fact way. "What is happening?" "Shh," whispered Mary Lou. "We are in fairyland." And Tommy stopped saying it's all nonsense, or you won't see the elves and the fairies. This time Tommy didn't argue with Mary Lou. Wherever he saw elves, they were busily sawing planks and building trestle tables and benches just like those in a picnic ground. Other elves with buckets and mops were scrubbing and polishing the rocks, as though they were all getting ready for a party. The elf in charge was named Gruffy. He was muttering and sputtering orders, and he was trying to chase away the younger elves who were playing tag around the workmen. "By hickory and by dickory," exclaimed Tommy. Gruffy heard him. "By hickory and by dickory," he shouted as he turned around to stare at the children. "By ackery and by Zachary, how did you learn the password? And where did you find the key?" "Well, I always say by hickory and by dickory," said Tommy, "but I don't know anything about ackery and Zachary." Never mind, you're not supposed to know. Now I'm in real trouble. I have to stop my work and take you to the Queen, and we'll never be ready for the party." Elves began to crowd around the children, and Mary Lou smiled at them. "What party, sir?" she asked politely. "The Queen's party," said Gruffy. "Didn't you know that the Queen always gives a party on the first day of summer? That's when the new year starts in fairyland." Then he clapped his hands and shouted, "Elves, back to work. Every one of you, or none of you, will go to the party. Come along, children. I must take you to the Queen before it's too late." "Too late for what?" asked Tommy, who always wanted to know all the facts about everything. "Too late to send you home, of course. Real people are not allowed in fairyland," replied Gruffy, as he hurried the children along a queer little path bordered with flowers. Everywhere fairies and elves were busily working. When they came to the very biggest tree in the forest, Gruffy stopped and said in a low voice, "Hickory dickory." And then the tree trunk opened and elfin guards answered, "Ackery, Zachary." Gruffy led Tommy and Mary Lou through a long, wide hall until they came to the great throne room. Oh, it was the biggest and the most beautiful room that Tommy and Mary Lou had ever seen. At the very end of the room, the Fairy Queen sat on her throne. She wore a golden crown with a shining diamond star. Mary Lou and Tommy had never seen anyone so beautiful. The Queen was surrounded by her court. her fairies in waiting, and the Prime Minister. I knew some child would find it, said the Prime Minister. Find what, my lord? Asked the Queen. The key to fairyland. I lost it last night when I was out delivering invitations to the birds and the butterflies. Now you will banish me from fairyland. Oh, of course not, said the Queen. It's true that whoever finds the key need never return it. But my dear Prime Minister, we have copies of the key. Just make a New Year's resolution that you'll never again lose your key. Gruffy became impatient. May I go now? There's so much work to be done. Now, shall I take the children? Oh, no, leave them. Here's Gruffy. They can play with the elves and the fairies until it's time for the party. Oh, what fun Tommy and Mary Lou had that afternoon. The fairies showed Mary Lou the dresses they were going to wear to the party, and the elves took Tommy to the magic pool. There he showed them how to swim without getting wet and how to sail an oak leaf boat. They let him slide down a pea pod, and they all played hide and seek among the toadstools. That night at the party, Tommy sat at the Queen's right hand, and Mary Lou sat at her left, which was a great honor indeed. They watched the birds and the butterflies, and they circled through the air. The crickets and the katydids played their violins. The lightning bugs hung in the trees like little lanterns. The elves and the fairies danced and sang. Tommy and Mary Lou drank wild strawberry juice out of acorn cups, and they ate honey cake and candies made from ginger root. They ate and they ate. Then they began to feel sleepy. In the middle of the party, they fell sound asleep, which was very rude, of course. But then they were so very tired. And who do you think woke them up? Gruffy? No. The Prime Minister? No. It was their mother calling them home to dinner. And where do you think she found them? On the big rock by the old oak tree, at the very place where they had entered fairyland. And on the way home, Tommy dug his hand into his pocket. By hickory and by dickory, there was the key. And Mary Lou said, "Oh, Tommy, you still have the key. We can always go back again." By hickory and by dickory, said Tommy, and this time he did not say nonsense. And that is the story of the magic key. And now I have just time enough to remind you to join your summer reading game and just open a book every day this summer. Just open a book and start to read through the world of adventure that's waiting for you. You can take a long trip on a buccaneer ship or walk in the sands where the pyramids stand. You can go to the moon and, if you please, see for yourself if it's made of green cheese. Just open a book, it's all you need to do to make your most fabulous wishes come true. You can sit with cavemen and sit by the caves, or run in the sun with some Indian braves, or see distant shores or great dinosaurs, or fly with an eagle and learn how it soars. What else is in books? Just take a good look. Paul Bunyan is waiting for someone like you to ask him why Babe, his pet ox, is blue. And young Johnny Appleseed sure needs a hand, planting his seedlings all over the land. With books you can travel and easily greet all the people that you've wanted to meet. You can ride beside Zorro on a wild escape, or sneak a quick peek at Dracula's cave. Tom Sawyer is building a raft with Huck Finn. As soon as you get there, the voyage will begin. Boys and girls, you can go to a party with Laurel and Hardy, and if you like, might even choose to find out why Bigfoot can't wear any shoes. Yes, books are a way to enjoy every day. So next time you think you've got nothing to do, just look at the books that are written for you. And that is the story. Just open a book. And boys and girls, we want you to open lots of books this summer and join our summer reading program. Till then, this is Eleanor Hawkins saying bye-bye for Telestory Time.